Down in the Louisiana swamps, locals know never to wait for a train that isn't on the schedule. On stormy nights, a black steam locomotive rolls across abandoned tracks. It has no identifying numbers, no living conductor, and no final destination. Ethan Walker made a living exposing hoaxes. He didn't believe in curses or phantoms. So, to collect a few million easy views online, he traveled south to spend a rainy night at the crumbling St. Gabriel station, fully intending to catch empty tracks on camera and debunk the myth forever. The only person he found there was an elderly janitor named R. Sharma, sweeping rainwater off the platform. Sharma didn't try to scare him. He simply offered a quiet warning. The train doesn't arrive for everyone. It only comes for people carrying a guilt they refuse to leave behind. Ethan laughed it off, but the second the station clock struck midnight, a whistle echoed across the water. Without a single sound from the engine, a massive train materialized from the fog. Its doors opened on their own. Overcome by a sudden, terrifying curiosity, Ethan stepped aboard, and then the doors slammed shut behind him. It's a compelling piece of horror fiction, but it forces a fascinating cultural question. We have thousands of ways to tell ghost stories in the United States. Why does American mythology consistently choose a train headed to New Orleans as our ultimate symbol for supernatural punishment? To understand the myth, you have to look at the ground it was built on. The midnight train doesn't run on imaginary tracks. The legends perfectly trace the real-life route of the Illinois Central Railroad, a massive line historically connecting Chicago all the way down to New Orleans. This railway functioned as a massive geographical artery, a physical manifestation of industrial weight moving across the center of the country. For decades, it moved heavy freight, mail, and millions of passengers between the northern industrial hubs and the Deep South. But look at who actually spent their lives on those trains. The Pullman porters working the lines were almost entirely marginalized Americans. They worked brutal hours for low pay, serving wealthy travelers while dealing with intense systemic discrimination. The route became a direct conduit for their physical and emotional exhaustion. Long before anyone started whispering about a ghost train in the swamps, the Illinois Central was already a vessel for the collective trauma of the American working class. The horror stories didn't invent the pain of the railroad, they just gave it a supernatural face. Back on the train, Ethan realizes he's trapped in a moving nightmare. The carriage is full, but the passengers are completely silent. A young soldier in a World War II uniform sits across from a businessman reading a paper from 1978, and none of them are blinking. These silent, transient outcasts reflect a very specific piece of history. In the early 20th century, the railroad was the only viable escape route for African Americans trying to survive extreme systemic oppression in the South. This created the concept of the freight train blues. Early musicians and laborers who couldn't afford a ticket would hop the trains, hiding in boxcars and riding the rails from town to town. It was a desperate, dangerous way to exist entirely on the margins of society. If you listen to traditional blues lyrics, the railroad acts as a strange paradox. Jumping a freight train offered a physical getaway from poverty and violence. But because these riders were never accepted anywhere they landed, the train also represented a tragic, restless wandering. It was motion without a destination. That's why Ethan's fellow passengers sit in total silence. Adhering perfectly to the logic of the early blues writers, they are eternal outcasts. They don't speak because they have finally accepted they have no true home to return to. The carriage suddenly plunges into a pitch-black tunnel. A voice whispers for Ethan not to look outside. He disobeys. Pressing his face to the glass, he sees something looking back at him. It has no face, only hundreds of glowing eyes, blinking independently. To understand what that monster actually is, we have to fast forward to the 1950s. White writers of the Beat generation, most notably Jack Kerouac, became obsessed with the transient lifestyle of those early marginalized rail riders. The Beats romanticized the idea of becoming subterranean. They believed that the only way to find a pure, authentic version of humanity was to live entirely outside the constraints of mainstream society. They romanticized poverty, hitchhiking, and hopping freight trains. But removing all societal constraints came with severe consequences. By dropping completely out of standard American life, many in the Beat movement drifted directly into dangerous drug addictions, trouble with the law, and intense spiritual suffering. The faceless entity outside Ethan's window is the terrifying reality of that Beat ideology. It is a visual representation of what happens when you completely sever yourself from society. Eventually, the isolation consumes your identity entirely, leaving you as nothing more than a collection of empty eyes in the dark. The train finally screeches to a halt at a dilapidated platform. The sign outside reads, "Regret." No one gets off, but the empty seat next to Ethan is suddenly filled. He turns to see his younger sister, who drowned 15 years earlier, smiling at him with empty, pitch-black eyes. The railroad promises an exit from pain, history, and guilt, but the moment you board, the carriage transforms into a mobile prison. The very vehicle you chose for your escape now functions as the walls that keep you trapped with your own past. This theme of inescapable sorrow runs deep through American culture. You hear it in the melancholic folk songs of Arlo Guthrie singing about the city of New Orleans. You feel it in the frantic, uninhibited jazz of musicians like Charlie Parker, who channeled immense personal suffering into brilliant art, but could never quite outrun his own demons. Whether expressed through a blues chord, a beat poem, or an internet horror story, the narrative of the train always circles back on itself. It eventually forces its riders to sit quietly next to the exact trauma they were desperately trying to leave behind. Before the creature can claim Ethan, the janitor, Sharma, appears in the aisle. He recites an ancient protective ritual, and the entity shatters into countless bright sparks. Sharma explains the train is an ancient spiritual containment vessel designed to carry the collective trauma of the country away from the living world. Ethan wakes up the next morning, lying on the rusted platform of St. Gabriel Station. The sun is rising. The tracks are empty and overgrown with weeds. Clutched in his hand is a single, faded yellow train ticket. Printed across the front are 2 words, "Return granted." He publishes his story, treating it as fiction. But months later, safely back in his 12th-floor apartment in Boston, he hears a train whistle. He finds a vintage conductor's cap outside his door, and on his fogged living room window, an invisible finger slowly traces the words, "Welcome back." From the marginalized laborers hopping early freight trains, to the beat riders hitchhiking across the country, to the modern urban legends of phantom locomotives, we keep using the railroad for the exact same purpose. We use it to symbolize the act of outrunning ourselves. The midnight train endures in our mythology because it represents a harsh psychological truth. You can pack your bags, head to the station, and buy a ticket to the absolute edge of the country. But you can never buy a ticket away from yourself.
Subscribe my channel for more updates and more haunted video like this, and press the bell icon for latest notifications.